to this, another episode of A Million Little TV Shows podcast. This is where we break down and discuss episodes of TV shows that you may not have even heard of. I believe these TV shows need a little more love, and that is what this platform is here to do. Each week we will be covering different shows from all over the globe. We'll be breaking down each episode, giving you the main highlights, and going through it bit by bit. But for now, I think it's best that we find out what's on the menu today. Hello there, and welcome back to this A Million Little TV Shows podcast. This is now episode 2 of season 7, and I've just watched the first episode of the show that I'm about to cover, and getting back into this world is so insane. I totally forgot how the last season ended. Obviously we'll do a quick recap of that, but today I'm going to be covering Ginny and Georgia, and genuinely hearing that southern accent again, it just makes me feel warm and fuzzy. I genuinely think Brienne Howie does a really good job of being this Southern belle with a very menacing past. But one thing that I don't think I mentioned last season is the job that Nikki Rumel does as a young version of Georgia. Because I think she is incredible playing this young mum who has had this terrible past and is obviously just trying to get away from it all. And then we sort of see the parallels between both Ginny and Georgia as their younger selves. And we certainly see more of that in this episode. So, as you can tell, I'm going to be talking about Ginny and Georgia today. And this is all going to come out just before, hopefully, the season 3 comes out. But as yet, there is no actual confirmed date when these shows will come out. But it has been renewed for a 3rd and 4th season. So, hopefully, I'll get more news on that soon. And, it could be in the next few months when I actually get that information, so obviously I will relay it onto you guys as soon as I hear. But I'm really excited to get back into this, so I think that's what I'll do. So, this is Ginny and Georgia, Season 2, Episodes 1 to 3. So, like I said, let's have a little catch up. So, Georgia is a mum of 2 who moves up the country from Georgia up to Massachusetts. And before she was living out of a trailer or out of small apartments. And as time's gone on, she has worked her way up, I suppose, a social ladder. She's always met men that would have been classed as being above her. As in, they were men of social standing and power. And each time Georgia has managed to get hold of one of these men and rise herself up a little bit more. She's always wanted to do the best for her daughter and never wanted her to want for anything. But in that, she has had to make sacrifices along the way. And those sacrifices come in the form of sometimes she had to do what was best for her children, as in murdering people. And we know for a fact that she killed her last husband, but since she was in his will as his main beneficiary, she ended up taking all his money. We also know that she was in a relationship earlier on and ended up having to kill him because he was abusive and handsy. But at the end of last season, her daughter Ginny found out all about this. And even though she'd been having problems of her own with her mother and her friends and her father, once Ginny found out that her mum was a murderer, she decided to leave. And the last shot of last episode was her leaving on a bike that she'd stole from her neighbour Marcus, who we'll get to in a minute, and riding off out of town. So as I said, we'll get to him shortly, but this fella Marcus that she was seeing is her best friend's brother, twin brother in fact. And Ginny didn't know how to break it to her best friend. And when this all came out, her friend disowned her, as well as the group of girls that she was actually with. And this girl, Maxine, actually was the one who introduced her around the school at first. She sort of took her under her wing, and then now she's abandoned her because of her relationship with her brother Marcus. But I think from there we should just get into the episodes, and as I go along, as things come up, I'll remind you of those things. So, let's do this. Episode 1, Welcome Back Bitches. which, in fairness, is a great title for this episode. So like I say, at the end of last season, we saw Ginny and Austin, her little brother, riding off into the night to head somewhere. We're not entirely sure where. On that very same night, Georgia and her husband Paul, or husband-to-be Paul, who is the mayor of the town, had just been re-elected. Georgia had also revealed to a PI that's been investigating her that the man that she killed, her former husband, a man who tried to feel Ginny up earlier on in their life, she revealed that she'd actually done something very clever with the remains of this man, because she'd got former contacts of hers to dig him up, incinerate him, and then she'd used him in fireworks that she was using for Paul's inauguration. And so, as she set the fireworks off, essentially she was scattering this guy across her district. So we just see how malicious this woman can actually be. But as we start this episode, we actually see Ginny in her normal bed. And when her mum comes in, she starts talking to her, playing around with her, messing around, and it seems like they're back to normal. Eventually, Georgia ends up putting a pillow over Ginny's face as they're play wrestling, and then gets serious. And it looks like she's about to kill her own daughter until Ginny obviously wakes up. And we find out that she drove to Boston to be with Zion, her father. Not Austin's father, because Austin's father is in jail, which is another fucked up thing that Georgia did. So Austin would continue to write to his father in jail. His mother would then take those letters, never deliver them, but write her own interpretation back to Austin to make him feel like his dad cared. We never know if his dad did care, because he never got the chance to. And as sweet as it sounds from Georgia, it's a little bit manipulative. And that was what Austin found out at the end of last season as well, and that's why he went with his sister. So now that she's awake, we find out that it is Thanksgiving. And obviously in the US this is a massive thing, so everyone is coming over. They're all having family things. Maxine, Marcus and their family are having a big thing. Georgia is going off to see Paul's family. And Ginny is obviously with her dad. And he is having his family come over. Like I've said, Austin isn't Zion's kid, but Zion never felt like he wasn't his. So he always looks after him whenever he's around. He doesn't treat him any different to his daughter. And that includes when Zion's parents turn up and they treat him as if he is their grandson. Georgia just keeps talking about how pissed off she is with Ginny because Ginny has done a runner. And much like everything else with Georgia, she just cannot accept that she is in the wrong on this one. And she can't also confess as to why this has happened. This has all happened because she's been in the wrong. She hasn't told her kids the truth, and also she's been killing people. So it's not been confirmed yet from a standpoint of Ginny, but she's heard what this PI has to say. And she's found evidence on her own that her mother's potentially done this. But Georgia just will not budge when it comes to her attitude towards Ginny, and she will not make the first move, as in ringing her to make sure that she is okay. She is leaving her with Zion over the Thanksgiving period. While at the family events, though, Georgia finds out how Paul's parents feel about her. She goes in with all the airs and graces, and she is very polite, very kind, and very snappy with some of her answers, and basically a delight. A southern belle with a big smile and a big heart. And you think that she's amazing throughout. But the parents don't think so. They can see that she isn't from the background that they would like. And especially having two kids by two different dads, and the fact that she's travelled around quite a lot doesn't sit well with them. And so they speak to Paul and they try and convince their son that this girl isn't for you. In fact, the dad says this is the type of girl you have fun with, but she's not the type you marry, which is a sickening thought, in all fairness, and should never be spoken about. But if that's the way that he wants to be, then that's on him. That's nothing to do with Georgia. And Paul basically stands by Georgia. He feels that he's in love with her, and he feels that this is the right thing for him to be doing. And so even though Georgia hears all of this, when she walks out, she's all smiles and holds her tongue, which is something of a feat for Georgia. But also when we see Zion's parents leaving, they say very similar things about Georgia. Obviously at the end of last season, we saw that maybe at one point Georgia and Zion were going to get back together, and that's one of the things that threw Ginny off the rails. But as Zion's parents are leaving, they tell him that he shouldn't be with someone like Georgia and that Ginny needs some stability in her life. And in fairness, she's not been getting that for a long time. So maybe, just maybe, Zion needs to step in and take the reins, but also he needs to find someone who is stable on his level, because Georgia certainly isn't it. So we see that Georgia's been having this struggle pretty much all her life. Like I say, she came from a trailer park and that is still how people see her. Even though she's tried her hardest to get where she is now, sometimes through nefarious means, but still, she's risen through the ranks to try and get to this high level of status, where she's dating a mayor, essentially. Of course, Ginny overhears all of this, and when she heads back to her room, she starts to harm herself again. But she comes to some sort of realization that she needs to talk to someone about this, and she feels that she can reach out to her dad, so when she goes to speak to him, she tells him exactly what's been going on with her. At one point, you're convinced that she's going to tell him what Georgia's been up to, and that potentially she's killed not only one man but two. But in the end, she doesn't. She just tells him that she's been burning herself. And when Zion suggests that maybe they need to talk to Georgia about this, Ginny isn't impressed, because she thought she could trust her dad, and it turns out that he is just wanting the best for his daughter. But at that particular time, she was so vulnerable and it was so raw to her that she needed to get away from the situation. Zion, in that time, has also spoken to Georgia, and it turns out that he is going to be taking Ginny back home the very next day. So he thinks that she should speak to her mother and tell Georgia exactly what's been going on with her. That she's been getting such bad anxiety that she ends up having a panic attack while in front of Zion. The next day, Zion takes her back to her mother's, and reluctantly she goes with Austin. Neither child wants anything to do with Georgia at the time, but she manages to win Austin over because he is a little bit younger and he does like to play games and be silly. Ginny, however, just doesn't want to know her mum. And it's only when Zion actually is going to spill her secret and tells Georgia what's been going on that Ginny tells him that she doesn't want her to know, and that she'll come home if that's what it takes for her not to know this secret. Because this is something that Ginny needs to deal with, but she doesn't want Georgia in on, because Georgia is the cause of all this. So now everyone is back in place. We see some flashbacks through Georgia's life, one of which is how we think the dance parties possibly came along. So in the first season we saw when Georgia needed to burn some energy and sort of get her kids back on side, she would do these dance parties where she'd just bang the music up loud and dance around the room. But we find out that this may have been to mask the noise of people banging on doors and trying to get into their apartments when they were a lot younger. And so we see a very terrified Georgia in her flat where she killed her first husband or boyfriend, I can't remember which it was, and she was just dancing around the flat with the kids with the music loud, but her ex was banging on the door, baying for blood and wanting to get in. And it's here that she wakes up in her bed and we find that she also has pretty bad panic attacks. And that is how Zion knew how to treat Ginny when she had hers, because he'd seen this before from Georgia. Episode 2, Why Does Everything Have to Be So Terrible All the Time Forever? Which I absolutely nailed in one take there. So I'm pretty proud of myself, because I don't usually. And there's a few people out there who I know listen to this podcast who know exactly what I'm talking about there. So they'll have had a good laugh at least. So with the fact that Paul and Georgia are actually living apart at this particular point in time, even though they are getting married, Georgia decides that they have to do sort of a soft launch to have them both living together. So she essentially asks Paul to move in, or at least she asks him to move some of his clothes in, since the fact that he's there most of the time anyway. He, however, at this point thinks that it's a good idea, but also a bad one, with the fact that Austin and Ginny are going through so much that maybe it's not the best time to have more upheaval in their life. Georgia agrees with him, and that's why it is sort of a soft launch that he just has a few items of clothing at hers, so he doesn't have to go and get changed to go back to work. However, as soon as Georgia starts speaking to Ginny and realises that Ginny isn't speaking to her, she almost yells it at Ginny that Paul's going to be moving in, because she wants to hurt Ginny for whatever reason. She just wants to provoke a reaction from her, and for her, Ginny that is, it doesn't really seem to work. Paul, however, isn't too pleased because obviously they just agreed that they weren't going to tell the kids, and now it's been blurted out. She takes Austin to school and he asks exactly the same thing. Is Paul going to be moving in with us? To which Georgia can only answer yes. And so it would seem that both her kids are smarter than she gives them credit for, because both of them knew long before any of this that she was going to get entangled with a man when they moved up north, and not only that she was going to end up probably moving in with that person. It's Ginny's first day back at school since everything went down, and as soon as she walks in, she ends up getting shunned by the people that she would generally hang around with, including Maxine, in fact, mostly led by Maxine. When she heads over to go and see Marcus, Marcus also gives her a nod, but he's still the same awkward Marcus in public, the one that she doesn't see when he sneaks in through her window, and so she feels awkward seeing him. A couple of her other friends who were there for her last season turn up and they start talking to her, and she seems to be getting along with these people a lot more. But when she looks down the corridor, she also sees that Abby is on her own too. We saw in the last episode that Abby actually came over for a post-Thanksgiving thing that they always do, something that Maxine, Nora and Abby would have done previously. But when she gets there, Maxine and Nora just don't want to know, and so Abby is once again shunned out. And with everything that's going on with her parents, the divorce, and the fact that she is also in a body dysmorphia situation where she wants to hurt herself, it's not good that she has been shunned out from the people that she really needs support from right now. And unlike Ginny, who has also made friends elsewhere in the school, it would seem that Abby is truly alone. She's always been around Maxine and Nora, and now she's been shunned. Ginny gets through the day, and much later on, Zion comes to see her at school, which kind of sucks for Ginny because Zion is a very attractive man, and obviously she has a very attractive mother as well, so whenever her parents pick her up from school, she's getting looks from all sides because of the person that she's with. So she always gets embarrassed by her parents. But the reason that Zion's come to pick her up is because after what was revealed in the last episode with Ginny's hurting herself, Zion's actually booked her in for therapy sessions, without George's knowledge, obviously. So once he takes her to these sessions and she starts to talk about her upbringing and her mother and everything that's been going on, it's quite an awkward situation in all fairness, because Ginny wants to start talking about things that have happened in her life, and she needs to get to that point where she's comfortable enough to talk about what happened with her and the fact that she's been hurting herself. But the therapist sort of, obviously it's just for TV, but it feels forced. She sits down with a therapist and this woman basically says, this is a safe space. We'll only talk about what you want to talk about. And within literally 2 seconds of Ginny opening up, she goes, well, what about you burning yourself? And I just didn't like that. That's not how, in my opinion, a therapist would be. But I suppose they're trying to get to the root cause of the problem. And then once Ginny gets home, obviously Georgia is straight on her, wanting to know where she's been, wanting to know what she's been up to, and Zion just rides off. Ginny tells her that she's not hungry and that she's just going to go upstairs, and that's exactly what she does. But when Georgia tells her, look, I've made food, so if you want to eat, you've got to eat now. But if you're not going to eat, then you're not going to eat at all. Ginny tells her, well, I won't eat then. And Georgia, who's going through some stuff, which obviously we'll get to, ends up having this irrational reaction to that. And she ends up emptying the cupboards to ensure that Ginny just cannot eat at all, which is a strange scene. I get why it's there, but it's a strange scene that the next morning Ginny comes down and she's like, where's all the food? And Georgia just tells her, if you want to eat in this house, you have to earn it. And so Ginny then has to go and beg for her job back, because obviously when she left town, she didn't tell Joe, the owner of Blue Farm, where she was actually going. So when she gets there, she has to basically convince Joe to let her come back, because he's not happy with the fact that she just left, and especially over Thanksgiving, because it's the busiest time of the year. Joe's a soft touch though, and essentially he lets her come back. But while she's there, she's going to end up working with Padma, who is Marcus's ex-girlfriend. So there's going to be some awkward situations, and we get one in this episode where Marcus comes in and his mum basically says, there's a situation here between the three of you, whatever it is, I guess it's his fault. Which, I mean, she's not wrong, but it's a very awkward situation for all three involved. And so now that she's earning, she comes back home, and once again, her mother starts going on at her, asking her where she's been. Ginny just says, I've been at work. I'm working back at the restaurant. So, can I get off my back? Georgia just seems to be up for a fight at all times at this particular point. And again, we'll get to some of the reasons why, but it just seems that she is picking on Ginny at all times. I've been in a very similar situation where many, many years ago I was living with my dad, and I moved out of his house, and I moved back in with my mum, and I was actually working with him at the time. It was during the summer holidays, and I went to work with him one day, and throughout the whole day where I was there, he basically berated me all day. He picked on me all day. And it was a difficult situation for me, so I really empathise with Ginny at this point, because Georgia is angry for no particular reason towards Ginny. Yes, she's hurt him, but she is the adult in this situation, and she should sort of take a step back and try and see things from her daughter's point of view. Georgia's been in that situation before. She has been the other side of the coin, whereas Ginny never has. But coming from a person who's not a parent, I suppose that's my own opinion, and I can shove it if I need to. But then after this second fight, Paul comes to see Ginny, and he starts to tell her that even though he's moving in, he doesn't want anything to change. He obviously knows that she's got Zion, but when it comes to Austin, he knows that Austin's dad's a bad guy, and that the fact that he took out credit cards in Austin's name is something that he never wants Austin to go through again. And this is the first time Ginny's hearing about any of this. And so Ginny checks her own credit score, knowing that potentially her mother has got her into trouble. And she finds that she certainly has. Her credit score is through the floor. And it obviously means that Ginny is going to have a bad future if it's not sorted in a very quick time, which it obviously isn't getting sorted at all at the minute. And so we'll get on with what Georgia's been getting up to and why she's so pissed off in this episode. So Georgia wants to actually join a thing called the Neighbourhood Club, which will give her access to certain venues that she can actually use in situations. So for instance, last season when she was trying to put on a casino, she tried to get access to a certain place but couldn't get it because Cynthia was in the way. And this neighbourhood club was in the way. Whereas if she's a member, she can have a seat at the table to actually help make these decisions and try and manipulate people from within. So when she ends up going to see this committee about joining, they tell her that she needs a sponsor. And so she goes to the one person that she thinks will help, but it's always going to be a risk. And that one person is Cynthia. Cynthia at this point is really in a bad place. Her husband is dying and is in his final days. So Georgia thinks that maybe she can manipulate her. However, Cynthia sees straight through her because she knows exactly what she's trying to do and tells her, look, this isn't going to happen. And ends up telling the committee that Georgia isn't a good fit for this particular group of women at this particular time. Maybe when she's more integrated into the town, they can have another think about this, but right now, not a chance. So that's point one of why Georgia is in such a bad mood. Point two of why Georgia is in this foul mood is because the person that she works with, who she thought was becoming a friend of hers, Nick, actually found out that she was embezzling money until she ended up paying it back. So because the accounts balance, no one looked into it, but Nick did. And he confronts her about this, saying that she shouldn't actually be working there anymore. But Georgia tells him, look, if you wanted me out of here, you could have had me out of here. If you'd have said it, if you'd have spoken up, you could have done me out of a job here, but you didn't. So what's shady about you? Why are you keeping it a secret? To which he has no real answer. So now we've got to start thinking, why isn't he telling people about this? And then we've got this PI as well. This PI is still hanging around, and he tells Georgia that he's going to be investigating the mysterious disappearance of her former husband, Anthony Green. And we end up getting another clip from her past, where the biker gang that she used to hang around with comes over and takes a body away and cleans up. And we're not sure at this point whether it was an accident or on purpose that she killed him, but we know from the previous episode that he was about to kick her door in. So maybe it came from that particular night. And so we see that Ginny ends up trying to call her mum's bluff because of the mood that George has been in and the fact that Ginny is just in a similar mood. She comes down and Paul is sat in the kitchen. Georgia sees Paul and says, "What are you doing?" And he says, "Oh, Ginny's making me breakfast." And then we see the fact that Ginny is making him a shake, very much like what Georgia would have made for her ex. And so Georgia knows exactly what Ginny is up to and the message that she's trying to give. Episode 3, what are you playing at, little girl? Now, obviously that is a Georgia line, so it does sound better in a southern accent when she actually says it on the show. I'm not going to do that. There was a time when I probably would have tried, but I'm not going to. And so now that Georgia knows what Ginny knows about this whole thing with her ex-husband, Kenny, Georgia starts to get pissed off with Ginny because she's just playing games now. And so she kind of clears the house. She makes sure that Paul leaves the house without drinking a sip of this smoothie that Ginny has made for him. And then she tells him that she's going to be in late because she has a meeting at Austin's school, which is actually quite true. But then she turns on Ginny and starts to ask what the hell she's doing. And Ginny just basically tells her she's playing her own game because Georgia has kept all these secrets from her for so long that it's about time she got a taste of her own medicine. Georgia then heads off upstairs to go and get Austin ready for school, and Ginny steals a credit card which actually has Austin's name on it from Georgia's purse. And it's all in an effort to try and make sure that Georgia knows not to play games with her daughter anymore. But Ginny doesn't actually know the reason as to why Georgia's done all of this, or she doesn't seem to understand the reason. So then after Georgia leaves, Ginny ends up taking a big swig of this smoothie that she made, proving that there was nothing in it that was dangerous to Paul, but of course Georgia didn't know that, and questions would be asked if Ginny had managed to kill him and there were similar circumstances to Georgia's last husband. When Georgia actually gets to the school, she's asked if Austin needs some support, because obviously he's been moved around a lot, he's had a lot of things going on in his life, and the teacher at the school believes that maybe he could do with some sort of counselling. Obviously Georgia doesn't know that Ginny is in therapy, and counselling doesn't seem like an option for her. She thinks that she can just tough it out, and so can Austin. And she feels that that is what Ginny is doing as well, just toughing it out. But of course we now know different. She's trying to work on herself because of the anxiety that she's got, whereas that is something that Georgia wouldn't consider at all. Georgia earlier on in the day actually speaks to Paul because they're obviously planning this wedding and he catches her on the work computer looking at dresses. She wants to try and do it as a big lavish wedding, but Paul is very much a minimalist and just wants to do the bare bones. He just wants to marry her. And when they start to talk about venues, he asks about the neighbourhood club because obviously Georgia didn't get in there. And she tells him that he doesn't have to worry. She's got ideas of how to actually get back in there. And we see these ideas come to fruition later on because she goes over to visit Cynthia, who has had a really rough time of it. Like I've said, her husband is on his way out and her son has been playing up at school. And he's been stealing from school as well. And when Georgia hears about this, she can't help herself. And so she uses this fact to her advantage, because at the neighbourhood club they currently have an exhibition on, but it seems that their main centrepiece, some works by Emily Dickinson, has actually gone missing. And we find out later on that Georgia has actually slipped it into Cynthia's son's bag, along with a game that Austin was playing, which Ginny bought for him with the credit card that she stole. And so when Georgia actually goes to see if this boy has this game, Cynthia opens the backpack and finds not only the game in there, but this book as well. And so Georgia tells her that she's going to cover for her. She tells her that she's quite happy to take this book back because somebody dropped it off at the mayor's office. But she asks Cynthia one thing, and that is to get her into the neighbourhood club. So once again, she is manipulating her way into every situation in that town. And we see these tactics from Georgia quite often, that she will do things that are very questionable. And we see that's been instilled in her from quite a young age, because we get another flashback of her stealing from a store but using Ginny as the bait. So she steals some tops from a store but puts a hat on Ginny's head and walks out with it. And of course the alarm goes off, so she makes her excuses, gives the hat back, but nobody knows that she's got the t-shirts in the bag. So she's always shown that she's got this initiative, this craftiness, and this ruthlessness. Using her daughter in that way doesn't exactly show the best morals. But Ginny ends up learning why her mother does these things for her. So like I've said, after the whole smoothie debacle, Ginny goes to see her therapist. And her therapist tells her that she needs to start using certain techniques that will help her. She needs to start journaling, and she also needs to, if she ever feels that she is going to harm herself, to use a rubber band that is going to be on her wrist at all times, just to distract herself from the self-harm. And if she gets into a state where she knows that she cannot get away from the fact she's going to self-harm, she needs to call her therapist. And so we see her start to adopt these tactics quite early on. But Marcus has started to notice the fact that Ginny is really keeping secrets from him. Obviously he knows that she's in therapy, but he is really concerned about what she is keeping from him, because it really seems to be affecting her badly. But each time he actually tries to talk to her about this, she just brushes him off and gets out of the situation. It's only when she speaks to her dad that her dad actually tells her, if you can't express your feelings through just normal speaking, normal talking, words, whatever, do it through poetry. That's something that you've always been good at and something that really comes natural to you, and it will help you get to where you need to be. And so she starts to write poems, and when Marcus actually inquires about what's going on with her, she manages to articulate what is happening through a poem. And we can see that this is actually going to be a good course of therapy for her. But that doesn't stop her from being a teenager who wants to rebel against her parents and against the school. So when Abby comes over and tries to talk to her again after an incident with Maxine, Abby asks if she wants to go and smoke weed with her. And Ginny just heads off, out of school, and they end up smoking weed, eating food and dyeing their hair before coming back in for afternoon classes. And even when they end up getting caught and the school calls Georgia, Georgia once again defends her daughter, like we saw in last season when Ginny was caught shoplifting. The other girls weren't actually searched, but Ginny was because she was black, or Ginny was because she was caught, whereas the other two weren't. But Georgia comes in and she makes this big stink about, it's because my daughter's black. And she wants to defend Ginny at all costs against everyone, even though she's one person that will cause her pain at some point. And so even though they're at odds at this point, Georgia defends her daughter when the school call and ask if Ginny had a dentist appointment that day. And Georgia just goes off on one saying, if my daughter said that she had a dentist appointment, then she had a dentist appointment. And we just see how much she will defend her children, even if it is through blatant lies. Because she's someone that will always want to handle things in-house with herself. But when Ginny gets home, she knows that she's going to be in trouble for what she's done. And so Georgia starts to berate her daughter when she comes home, because she's had to lie to the school about what's gone on. And then Ginny says a name that I'm not even sure ends up getting resolved. But she mentions the name Mary, and we see a violent reaction from Georgia at this point. Ginny walks out and heads over to see Marcus, but Georgia has a full-on breakdown. She has a full-on panic attack, and she runs out of the house and jumps in the car and literally just sits in the car, trying to calm herself down while crying uncontrollably. And I cannot remember if this ever gets resolved. I've even looked through Wikipedia and stuff and I can't find it. When the name was mentioned, it wasn't in my head, so when it comes up, it will be a mystery to me as it is to you. But Ginny heads over to see Marcus, and she breaks down to him and tells him exactly what's been going on. And she tells him that she believes that Georgia has murdered people. Or, at this point, she thinks it's just one person, but obviously we know that she's had a past. Marcus seems very nonplussed by all of this. He's asking questions, but this doesn't seem to bother him. And when he tells Ginny that he's not surprised by any of this because Ginny's mom is a force, he says that he could understand that she would do something like this. She has that energy about her. And Ginny starts to worry that she is like her mother as well, and that she may be a force. She heads back to the house and sees her mum in the car. And she realises how much she's actually hurt her mother and goes over to speak to her. They sit in the car, and before Ginny can really get anything off her chest, she essentially just asks, "Why did you do it?" And Georgia comes back with this tirade of reasons why. But there's only two real reasons why, and that's Austin and Ginny. She'd do anything for those kids. And she told Ginny that hand just doesn't always stop on your thigh. And I needed to get you out of that unsafe situation. And any unsafe situation that you are in, I need to get you out of. I don't want this to be a situation where you are put in harm's way. I had to get to a certain point in my life where I've done bad things, but I've done bad things to get us to the place that we are now. And I am not ashamed of that, and I do not regret it one little bit. And it's such a fantastic speech from Georgia, and it's so well done. But it's here that Ginny realises how much she's actually hurt her mother, and that maybe she needs to give her a break. And they tell each other no more lies, and no more scamming each other, or whatever they're doing. And then little Austin comes to the car, and he's like, "Mum, can I have the game that you borrowed off me back?" And we realise, well, we already knew, that Georgia had scammed Cynthia, and she's just going to be the same old Georgia. So it feels like it's really started to ramp up this season already. Obviously, with the relationship between Ginny and Georgia and how fractured that has become, it is honestly quite worrying how this is going to turn out, especially when the first scene is Georgia killing Ginny in Ginny's dream. And so now that even though it has been explained, Ginny still has the fact that she is living with a murderer. And yes, it was to protect her and Austin, but Georgia's still a murderer, and there's still more to come from that situation that Ginny just doesn't even know about yet. But as much as I love this show for the just drama of it all and the great acting that comes with it, I genuinely enjoy Maxine in this show, except these first 3 episodes. She's a brat at times, she's annoying and a very frustrating character to watch, and I suppose would be someone that would be divisive. If I met her in real life, I'm sure I'd be very much a different opinion of her, as in the character, not the actor. But I feel like in this first 3 episodes, she's just annoying more so than ever, much more bratty, much more selfish, self-involved, narcissistic, and it's just a trope that I just didn't like at the beginning of this season. Especially because she's hating on Ginny at this point as well. When everyone's in on the joke and everyone's sort of just enjoying who she is, I can kind of get on board with it. But when she's hating on the main character, or on Abby in fact, it It kind of sucks. But I suppose that's her whole appeal, that there's going to be a redemption arc at some point. But always the standout performer in this show for me is, Ginny, Georgia are great. Austin, he's sort of come into his own this season a little bit more. Zion's great when he's there. He pulled off a great performance when he found out his daughter had been harming herself. Paul's great, and the Miller family are fantastic. But Clive, the dad of the Millers, who is a deaf actor, and the fact that all the Millers obviously know sign language because they've grown up with it. It's really great to see that sort of diversity on screen, to see someone who is not only on the show, but is on the show and is managing to pull off possibly the best lines of all. He's very funny, and to do that through sign language is such a special talent. I know obviously that people are talking while he is, or people are talking, or there's actually subtext underneath, but he's very, very funny, and I like that diversity on this show. Obviously, it's trying to be as diverse as possible because it's got a black lead and a black female lead at that. And then not only that, it's also got a 2 female lead. It's also got a lesbian character in there, and it's got a deaf character in there. So it's trying to tick certain boxes. But I do like the dad in this. I think he's great. So I'm going to go. This is me done for today. I never really can wrap up these episodes properly, but I thank you for listening. I hope you are going to go over and subscribe to the Patreon. I am now fully done with season 3 of Game of Thrones, so hopefully you'll go over there and you'll listen to me talk about 3 seasons of Game of Thrones. I am planning on doing the 4th instantly, so that will be up soon, and I'm hoping to get the full thing done pretty soon as well. So I hope you're all doing well out there. I thank you for listening, and until next time, I will speak to you soon. Bye. And that is it for now, amigos. And yes, I am as angry as you are at me for that sentence, but I hope you enjoyed the show and had some fun along the way. It means a lot that you are listening and supporting me. This is an independent podcast after all, and doesn't get a lot of backing, so it is great to know that you're out there, you're listening, and if you want to come talk to me on any of the platforms I'm on, just come say hi. I'm on Instagram, I'm on Twitter, and I'm even a little bit on TikTok. I don't post that much, but I'm on there. And you can also drop comments in the comment sections on any of the platforms: Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Podbean, wherever you get podcasts from. But as always, thank you for your time, and I will speak to you soon.